Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into a pretty wild story today from the book of Genesis, chapter 40 to be exact.
Oh yeah, this one's a real page turner.
It takes us right into the heart of ancient Egypt, where we find two of Pharaoh's top guys, his butler and baker, who've managed to, well, land themselves in prison.
Oh, sounds like trouble.
Yeah, not a good situation, especially when you consider that Joseph, the one who got sold into slavery by his own brothers, is already down there in that same prison.
Right, Joseph. Things are not looking good for any of these guys.
But here's the thing. What seems like a dead end actually becomes a major turning point for Joseph.
You know, it's amazing how this chapter really sets the stage for this whole chain of events.
It really does. It shows how even when things seem their worst, sometimes that's when the most unexpected opportunities pop up.
Exactly. And this time in prison, it becomes like this key stepping stone in Joseph's whole journey.
So to really grasp what's going on, let's paint a picture for our listeners. Imagine this. You're stuck in a dark, gloomy Egyptian prison.
Okay, not exactly a vacation
Yeah,
spot.
definitely not. And the butler and the baker, well, they're feeling pretty down in the dumps.
I mean, who wouldn't be?
Yeah.
But it's interesting how the text specifically mentions their sadness. Like it really emphasizes it.
Yeah, and that really speaks to Joseph's character, doesn't it? Even though he's got his own problems to deal with, he notices how much these guys are struggling.
Totally. He's not wallowing in self-pity. He's genuinely concerned for them. It's this compassion that we see throughout Joseph's story.
So their sadness, it turns out, comes from these seriously strange dreams they both had on the same night.
Dreams were a big deal back then, right? Like messages from the gods.
Exactly. In ancient cultures, dreams were seen as these incredibly significant, almost prophetic messages. So the fact that neither of them could understand their own dreams, it's a pretty big deal. They must have been really looking for answers.
They were definitely searching for something deeper than just a random dream.
And that's when Joseph steps in. He asks them, do not interpretations belong to God? It's like he's saying, hey, I think there's something spiritual going on here and I might be able to help.
It's this moment that really establishes this connection that Joseph has with the divine.
Exactly. He's not just some random dream interpreter. He's suggesting he's got this direct line to God.
It's a pretty bold claim, and it's going to have major implications down the road.
Okay, so the butler decides to go first. He describes this dream where he sees this vine with 3 branches, and it's totally thriving, overflowing with these ripe grapes, and he's taking these grapes and squeezing them into Pharaoh's cup.
Wow, that's a very vivid image.
It really is.
Yeah.
Now remember, in ancient Egypt, the vine was often seen as a symbol of abundance. So right away, you get this feeling that this dream's got a positive vibe to it.
The grapes themselves, too, I mean, that they represent fruitfulness, maybe even wine, which you could definitely connect to celebration and good fortune.
Totally. And then Joseph interprets it. He says those 3 branches, they represent 3 days. And within those 3 days, the butler is going to be back in his old job, serving Pharaoh his wine again.
It's really specific, isn't it?
Super specific. He doesn't beat around the bush. It's a clear timeline, a clear outcome. It definitely lends credibility to his claim of divine inspiration.
I'd say so.
Now, the baker's dream, oh boy. This one takes a bit of a dark turn.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, this one's a little unsettling. Picture this. The baker, he's got these 3 baskets of baked goods on his head, but there are these birds, and they're swooping down and eating from the top basket.
Yikes. Not exactly the same happy vibes as the butler's dream. It's interesting, though, how the 2 dreams are so different.
Right, the butler's dream, you've got this vine growing upwards, reaching for the sky.
Like growth and potential.
Exactly. But in the baker's dream, you've got these birds descending from above. It feels a lot heavier, more ominous, and unfortunately for the baker, Joseph confirms those bad vibes. He says the 3 baskets, just like the 3 branches, represent 3 days.
3 days till what?
3 days until he's executed. And his body. Left out for the birds.
Oof, that's rough. But again, Joseph is super direct, isn't he?
Right. He's not sugarcoating anything. He's giving it to them straight, whether it's good news or bad. It really reinforces this idea that he's tapped into something beyond human understanding.
You can really sense that divine connection at play.
Now, after delivering these interpretations, Joseph sees a sliver of hope. He turns to the butler and says, please, when things are back to normal for you, remember me. Talk to Pharaoh about me. Tell him I was kidnapped, that I don't belong here.
It's a simple request, really. But for Joseph, it represents this potential chance for freedom.
Absolutely. It's a lifeline. And it really highlights how desperate his situation is.
It really makes you think about the human need for connection and hope, even in the most dire circumstances.
Okay, so fast forward to Pharaoh's birthday. There's a huge celebration going on, and things play out exactly as Joseph predicted. The butler is back in his old job, pouring wine for Pharaoh.
And the baker,
Well, let's just say he wasn't invited to the party.
that's an understatement.
It really is. So here we have these prophecies coming true, which further solidifies this idea that Joseph has this special God-given gift. But it also puts a lot of weight on the butler's promise, doesn't it? He's back in a position of power. Now's his chance to repay Joseph, to speak up for him.
It's a major test of his character. Will he honor that connection they made back in prison? Or will he just forget about the one who helped him in his time of need?
And well, that's where things take a turn. And it's not a good one. The butler, he completely forgets about Joseph. Can you believe it?
Oh, wow. I mean, it's kind of a classic storytelling move, but it still stings a little, doesn't it? You'd think he'd be a little more grateful.
Right. After all that, he just forgets. It really makes you think about human nature, about how easily we can sometimes forget those who helped us, especially when things are going well for us.
Absolutely. It's like this story is holding up a mirror, forcing us to ask ourselves some tough questions about loyalty and gratitude.
It really is. And it's not just about Joseph's journey. It's about these universal themes of trust, disappointment, the unpredictable nature of life. It makes you think about the promises we make, the people we choose to remember, and the ones we unfortunately forget.
It's a powerful reminder, and one that's as relevant today as it was back then. Yeah, it's a bit of a bummer, isn't it? How easily we forget those who helped us along the way. But that's what's so great about these old stories. They really make you think about, well, about human nature.
And they really highlight how sometimes things just don't go the way we expect them to.
That's for sure. But in this case, the story doesn't just dwell on, Joseph's misfortune. It takes a pretty fascinating turn.
Fascinating, huh? Okay, now you've got me really curious. What happens next?
Well, Pharaoh starts having these really disturbing dreams.
Oh, so this is where things get really interesting.
These dreams are vivid, and they really start to freak him out.
What kind of dreams are we talking about here?
Okay, so in one dream, he sees these 7 healthy cows, just grazing by the Nile. But then, all of a sudden, these 7 skinny, like really sickly cows show up, and they just gobble up the healthy ones.
Whoa, that's kind of creepy.
It is, right? And then in another dream, he sees these 7 plump ears of grain growing on a single stalk. But then these 7 thin, withered ears sprout up, and they, swallow the plump ones whole.
Okay, those are some seriously strange dreams. Cows eating cows and grain swallowing grain. I mean, I'd be freaked out too if I were Pharaoh. Those sound like some kind of warning or something.
Exactly. Remember, dreams were considered really powerful omens in ancient cultures. So Bedford is right to be concerned. And guess what he does? He calls upon all his wise men and magicians, the best dream interpreters in all of Egypt.
Okay, so he's got the A-team on this.
The best of the best. But get this. They're completely stumped.
What? No way. They're supposed to be the dream experts.
I know, right? You can just imagine the pressure they must have felt. I mean, deciphering the Pharaoh's dreams, that's like the ultimate high-stakes gig.
Talk about a career-defining moment. So they're all standing there, scratching their heads, and Pharaoh's probably getting more and more anxious.
And the butler, well, let's just say he's probably sweating bullets, hoping that Pharaoh doesn't realize that he's the guy who completely forgot about the one person who could actually interpret these dreams.
Oh, man. Talk about awkward.
Right. But it's in this moment, witnessing Pharaoh's distress and the complete failure of his advisors that the butler finally has this big aha moment.
Like a flashback. He suddenly remembers Joseph.
Exactly. He remembers everything. Joseph and those incredible dream interpretations back in prison.
It's kind of funny, in a way, how his memory works.
Right. You'd think that owing your freedom to someone would be a little harder to forget.
Totally. But hey, better late than never, I guess.
Hey, that's for sure. And, this delayed recall, it really highlights the idea that sometimes things happen for a reason, like there's this perfect timing at play.
So what happens next? Does the butler just come right out and admit that he totally spaced on Joseph?
Well, the text doesn't give us all the juicy details about his apology, but we do know that he tells Pharaoh about his experience in prison and how Joseph accurately interpreted both his and the baker's dreams.
So he finally comes clean.
He does. And he basically tells Pharaoh that Joseph might be the key to understanding these crazy dreams.
Wow, so this guy's forgetfulness actually ends up leading to Joseph's big break. It's like something out of a movie.
It's a pretty incredible twist, right? It really shows how unpredictable life can be.
Okay, so now Joseph is being summoned from prison and brought before Pharaoh. Can you imagine what must have been going through his head?
I know, right? It's a seriously dramatic moment. This former slave, unjustly imprisoned, is now standing face to face with the most powerful ruler in all of Egypt.
It gives me chills just thinking about it. So what happens next? Does Joseph play it cool?
He does. Even though he must have been feeling a million emotions all at once, he stays humble. And he makes it very clear to Pharaoh that any interpretation he offers comes not from himself, but from a higher power.
That's smart. No pressure, right?
He's basically saying, look, I'm just the messenger here.
But this also sets up a pretty powerful dynamic, this idea that Joseph is speaking on behalf of God.
So what does he say about the dreams? What do they mean?
He interprets the two dreams as a single prophecy. He explains that the 7 healthy cows and the plump ears of grain, they represent 7 years of incredible abundance for Egypt.
Okay, so that's the good news.
Right. But then he drops the bombshell. He warns Pharaoh that these good years will be followed by 7 years of severe famine.
Oh, wow. 7 years of feast followed by 7 years of famine. That's a pretty wild prediction.
It's a pretty intense prophecy, but Joseph doesn't stop there. He actually offers Pharaoh a very practical solution.
Okay, I'm all ears. What's the plan? Joseph advises Pharaoh to appoint a really wise and capable official to basically oversee the collection and storage of grain during those good years.
Makes sense. Stock up while you can.
Right. He emphasizes how important it is to create a strategic reserve, like a giant pantry, to help them through the tough times.
So he's essentially proposing a national food bank.
Exactly. It's amazing how this ancient story still has so much relevance today, right?
Totally. It's like, hey, even when things are going great, it's a good idea to plan for the future.
Always be prepared.
So what about Joseph? Does he get to leave that prison cell? Does Pharaoh reward him for, saving Egypt?
Oh, Pharaoh does way more than just reward him. He appoints Joseph as the second most powerful man in all of Egypt.
Wait, what? You're kidding, right? From prisoner to, Pharaoh's right-hand man.
It's a mind-blowing turn of events.
It really is. And it's like all those years of suffering and injustice, they were somehow leading up to this incredible moment.
You can definitely see a theme of redemption running through this whole story.
So what does Joseph do with this power? How does he handle being in charge?
Well, that's what we'll be discussing in the final part of our deep dive. Stay tuned.
Last time we were talking about how Joseph basically went from prison to running Egypt.
Yeah, talk about a career change.
What a wild ride. But it really shows how much faith Pharaoh had in him.
It really does.
Yeah.
It speaks to Joseph's character, too. His ability to inspire trust and confidence.
Totally. So how does he handle all this new responsibility?
Well, he doesn't let it go to his head. He jumps right into action, preparing for those 7 years of famine.
Okay, so practical guy. No time to waste.
Exactly. And the text really highlights his organizational skills. He oversees this huge construction project, building all these massive granaries to store the surplus grain.
Wow, like ancient Egypt's version of a national food bank?
Pretty much. And it works. During those 7 years of abundance, Egypt thrives under his leadership. He's really got things running smoothly.
But what about when those lean years hit? Those 7 years of famine that he predicted. That had to have been a really tough time.
Oh, absolutely. It was a devastating famine.
Yeah.
It affected not only Egypt, but the surrounding lands as well.
People must have been desperate.
They were. There was widespread hunger and hardship, a real test of human resilience.
It's hard to even imagine what they must have gone through, but this is where Joseph's character really shines through.
He could have easily hoarded all that grain, kept it all for Egypt.
Yeah, that would have been tempting, right? To put his own people first.
You'd think so.
Yeah.
But he does something much more compassionate. He opens up those granaries and starts distributing grain, not just to the Egyptians, but to people from other nations who were struggling.
Wow, so he's helping everyone.
He is. It's like he understood that this famine, it transcended borders. It was a global crisis that required a global response.
That's a really powerful message. It's about recognizing our shared humanity, especially in times of need.
Exactly. And it's through this act of incredible generosity that Joseph's story takes on this whole new dimension.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What do you mean?
It becomes a story about forgiveness, about reconciliation, about the triumph of good over evil.
This is where his brothers come back into the picture, right?
You got it. Remember those guys?
Yeah.
The ones who sold him into slavery.
Yeah, I can't believe they'd have the nerve to show up.
Well, they were desperate. They show up in Egypt looking for food.
No way. So the very people who betrayed him end up relying on him for their survival.
It's a crazy twist of fate, isn't it?
Seriously, it's like something out of a movie. I wonder if they even recognized him.
Well, that's the thing. Joseph recognizes them immediately, but they have no idea who he is.
Wow, talk about awkward.
Right. And, he could have taken revenge. He
Yeah.
could have turned them away.
After all they did to him, I mean, I'd be tempted.
But he doesn't. He chooses forgiveness and compassion.
That's incredible. He must have such a big heart. So what does he do?
He tests them at first. He puts them through these challenges to see if they've really changed, to see if they truly understand what they did to him.
Wow, that's intense.
It is. But eventually he reveals his identity to them.
Can you imagine that moment?
I know, right? All those years of pain and separation, and then this incredible act of forgiveness.
It must have been incredibly emotional.
It was. The text describes it as this powerful scene of tears, apologies, and ultimately reconciliation.
It's like this story shows us the power of letting go of the past and embracing forgiveness.
It really does, and it reminds us that even in the darkest moments, hope and redemption are always possible.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into the story of Joseph, what can we take away from it? Why does this ancient story still resonate with us today?
I think it's because it speaks to these universal human experiences of suffering and resilience, of betrayal and forgiveness, and ultimately of hope and redemption. It reminds us that no matter how difficult things may seem, there's always a possibility for a brighter future.
It's a story that encourages us to look beyond the immediate challenges and see the bigger picture, to trust in a higher purpose, even when we can't fully understand it, and to choose compassion and forgiveness, even when it's hard.
It's a powerful message, and one that I think we all need to hear from time to time.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. It's been an incredible journey through the book of Genesis. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it as thought-provoking and inspiring as we did. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep seeking those deeper truths that connect us all.